Amen. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we shall rejoice and be glad in it. Today, we're going to talk about the introduction to Ezra. We've gone completely through the Bible, and we finished 2nd Chronicles, and now we're in the book of Ezra. Ezra, back to Jerusalem. Rebuilding the temple. Construction of the temple of God began in mid-spring, during the 2nd year after they arrived to Jerusalem. The workforce was made up of everyone who had returned from exile, Ezra 3 and 8. The returning Jews take up an offering among themselves to buy supplies for rebuilding of the temple. They come up with about half a ton of gold and 3 tons of silver. That sounds like a lot, but it's a mini-scale fraction of what David had stockpiled for his son Solomon to the use in buying supplies for the first temple, 4,000 tons of gold and 40,000 tons of silver. It's easy to see the staggering difference in money raised when we convert the gold and silver to dollars. When gold sells for $5.50 an ounce and silver for $10 an ounce on today's market, the amount David raised was about 83 billion, compared to about 9 million raised by the returning refugees. The Jews take a couple of years to get settled into their homes and establish their gardens and flocks. They also build an altar so that they can begin offering sacrifices to God. Then, during their second spring back, perhaps in April or May of 536 BC, they lay the foundation for the temple. Perhaps the foundation looks small or it lacks the high quality of craftsmanship of Solomon's temple. For though the young people cheer for joy at what they see, the older people who remember the first temple began crying. The writer doesn't say why they cry, but the implication is that they know they're getting what they paid for, an inferior temple. Non-Jewish locals who have settled in the land hate to see the Jews returning and building their nation. They start lobbying the Persian government to make the Jews stop working on this first major building project. The locals eventually succeed. First, they bribe the Persian officials who somehow slow the Jewish efforts. They then convince a new king, Artaxerxes, that the Jews have a long history of rebelling against the empires they are supposed to serve. So the king orders all work stopped. The work resumes a couple of decades later during the reign of King Darius. That's after the Jews convince him to search the royal records and find Cyrus's original decree urging the Jews to rebuild their temple. Darius finds the records. Then he not only orders the work to continue without interference, he also orders the governor to use tax money to pay for the construction. On March 12, 515 BC, the temple is finished. The date is precise because Ezra cross-references events that match surviving Persian records. Putting the two provides the date. Though this temple is just a shadow of Solomon's elegant worship center and the humblest of 3 temples that built the Jews during their history, it lasts longer than any other 500 years. That compares to about 400 years for Solomon's temple and less than 100 years for Herod's temple in the New Testament times. A priest condemns interracial marriage. You have committed a terrible sin. By marrying pagan women, you have increased Israel's guilt. So now confess your sin to the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and do what he demands. Separate yourselves from the people of the land and from these pagan women. Ezra 10:10-11. After 70 years after the first wave of the Jews leave Babylon for Israel, a priest named Ezra joins a second wave headed home. There are perhaps a few thousand Jews in this group. Ezra refers to about 1,500 men, but he's apparently not counting women and children. The priest leaves Babylon on April 8th, 458 BC, following one of several caravan routes up the Euphrates River, and then turning south, he arrives in Jerusalem 4 months later on August 4th. He's met by a group of Jewish leaders with a complaint. Many Jewish men have married non-Jewish women, so the holy race has become polluted by these mixed marriages, Ezra 9:2. The Jewish elders are concerned about a particular law from the time of Moses. This law forbids Jews from marrying non-Jewish locals who will lead your children away from me to worship other gods, Deuteronomy 7:4. This is what led to the exile. Oddly, it all began with a king famous for his wisdom. Solomon brought idolatry to Israel on a national scale when he married non-Jewish women who eventually convinced him to build shrines to their gods. The Jews don't want to repeat an incident, a tragic in history, complete with another invasion and deportation. Ezra goes to the temple where he lies on the ground, weeping and confessing the nation's fresh sin. There's a man named Ezra. There's a man named Shekinah, a son of Jehalel, and a descendant of Elam. He urges Ezra to order all Jewish men to divorce their non-Jewish wives and send them away along with their children. Ezra does as requested, though his demand seems both harsh and controversial. Some of the Jews of the day likely considered the ancient law out of date, persistent only to the Israelites in Joshua's time. After all, it referred to Canaanites of the conquest era. Also, David's dynasty began specifically because a Jewish man married a non-Jew, Ruth. She was from Moab in what is now Jordan. She became David's great-grandmother, and she loved God. In fact, it's possible that Ruth's story survived in the Bible, partly because it's an effective counterpoint to Ezra's order. Some Bible experts wonder if Shekinah had an ulterior motive for his request. His father is listed among the 113 Jewish men married to non-Jews. From the family of Elam, Mattaniah, Zechariah, Jeliel, Ezra 10:26. Perhaps Jeliel had 2 or more wives. If Shekinah was Jehalel's son by a Jew, Shekinah might have had plenty to gain by eliminating his half-brothers. At the least, he would have increased his inheritance because he disowned his brothers, and they would have got nothing. And if Jeliel's oldest son had been from a non-Jewish woman, Shekinah might have taken that son's place as the new head of the clan once Jehalel died. In that case, Shekinah would have received double share of inheritance, twice as much as any of his younger brothers. Whether or not God wanted the men to divorce their wives, Ezra and other leaders came to that conclusion. Jewish law, however, does not call for divorce after such a marriage. If it did, the Jews might have missed out on the greatest dynasty of their kings in their history. Amen. And that concludes our introduction to Ezra. And then on tomorrow, we're going to start off in Ezra chapter 1. Amen. Have a good day and see you on tomorrow.